When I was growing up, my dad and I lived with my grandparents. My parents had me while they were teenagers, and my dad got full custody because he lived with my grandparents, and my mom was just living with random friends, going from house to house every few weeks. I was the daughter that my grandparents never had, and they doted on me. When I was 6, my grandpa passed away from cancer. This story takes place about 5 months after he had passed away. This was, I believe, a Saturday, and my dad was at work. My gram decided to take me to McDonald's for lunch, and like any 6-year-old, I was really excited. So, we go to the McDonald's that was about 1.5 miles from our house, order our lunch, and sit down at a table to eat. At the time, we were the only ones eating inside. About 10 minutes after we sit down, a scraggly-looking man walks in, orders a meal, and sits down at a table diagonally in front of us to the left. The area we lived in was middle and upper middle class, so this guy looked pretty out of place. Gram had her back to him, but I could see him perfectly. This man was at least in his mid-50s, with a scraggly and dirty white hair and beard. He had on blue shorts and a white t-shirt, also kind of dirty, and sandals. It's amazing that this happened 21 years ago, and I can still remember it like it was yesterday. So, I noticed that under the table, this man had something dark pink and wrinkly on his lap, and he kept glancing at me and rubbing it every few seconds. In kindergarten, we learned about stranger danger and good touch, bad touch, and learned which parts of our body we're not supposed to touch. It clicked in my 6-year-old head that this man was not supposed to have it out like that, nor to be doing what he was doing. I got really queasy and nervous. I didn't want to tell my grandma right then and there because I thought the man would hurt us. If my dad had been there, I would have said something because my dad was my hero and he could take on anybody. Instead, I put my Happy Meal box in front of my face so my view of this guy would be blocked. I had about half my food left, but I had lost my appetite. Grandma asked me if I was full, and I just nodded yes. I was and still am very petite, so not finishing a full meal was nothing new to me. She asked me if I wanted to go play in the play area before we left, but I just shook my head and quietly said, I want to go home. Graham cleared our table and we left. When we got home, I was still really nervous and I felt like I was going to throw up. Graham asked me, "What's the matter?" And I started crying and told her about the man at the McDonald's and what I saw. My grandma didn't panic or freak out or get hysterical. She just hugged me and said, "It's alright, go into your room and play and I'll take care of it." She wiped my tears and gave me a blueberry Kool-Aid burst and told our dog Patches to go to my room with me, which she did. After I was out of earshot, Grandma called the McDonald's and told them about the guy, and he was still there. The manager told Graham that he would take care of it and call her back. An hour later, the manager calls back and tells Grandma that they had called the police, who showed up in record time and arrested the guy. When the police told the man to stand up, his Franken beans were still hanging out of his shorts. The manager also told Graham that she could bring me back for a month's worth of coupons for free Happy Meals. I have another story about a weirdo that happened a few years later, and this time my dad was there, and believe me, what my dad did to him was not pretty. But that's a story for another time. This happened 4 years ago. I'm a girl, and at the time this happened, I was 12, going on 13 in just a month or two. The friend that I mentioned in this story was 14 at the time. The friend Sally, who I was staying with that night, was quite a bit older than me. At least at the time, the 2-year age gap was quite big. At 12 or 13, I was about to start my second year of middle school, whereas Sally should have been about to begin her sophomore year of high school. I met her in the beginning of my first year at a new school. She was older than the other kids in our grade and was considered one of the popular kids, and I think that was what drew me to her first. We became fast friends, and before we knew it, we were spending every single weekend together. Seriously, every single weekend. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. It was your typical Friday night. We carpooled to our family's apartment after school. I've always been a picky eater, so when her family had dinner, I didn't eat with them. I just snacked on the Pop-Tart that I had stowed away in my backpack in case they had ordered something that I wouldn't eat. Something to note is that her family was pretty religious. I wouldn't go as far as to say as they were fanatics, but they didn't allow their kids to watch horror movies or anything that was rated PG-13 or older. It didn't stem from the desire to protect them from something inappropriate. Sally's mother had an irrational fear that scary movies had satanic messages. We asked to watch The Purge, and her mom obviously said no. After some negotiating, she agreed to let us watch The Hunger Games instead. After the movie, Sally and I went to hang out in her room. She put on some music, and being the age we were, we gave each other makeovers. By the end of it, we were looking older than 12 or 14. This part of the night is when things started to seem off to me. Sally wasn't the most positive influence. Despite being my best friend at the time, she was manipulative and got off on putting me down. She had a habit of talking to men online and lying about her age. Sally showed me some text messages between her and the man that she was talking to. I can't give you an exact recount of them, but they consisted of him trying to convince her to meet up with them, and just the usual things you would expect from a creep online. According to him, he was 19, tall and blonde with soulful blue eyes. Once I saw the text messages, I asked if she had a picture of him. Something didn't sit right with me after seeing the messages. She showed me what he looked like, and he was clearly not 19. This man was at least 40, and looked like he lived in his mother's basement. And then we got a call from him. Sally answered without hesitation, and when I heard the voice on the other end of the call, I felt like I was going to be sick. "Why don't you come meet me?" he asked. Sally said that she couldn't because she was spending the night with a friend. The mention of that sparked his interest, and then he proceeded to try and ask us both to meet him. Sally, lacking any common sense, said yes. Thus began her plan for us to sneak out and walk 15 blocks to meet him in a deserted McDonald's parking lot. I didn't want to go. I was raised on stories of what happens to teen girls who meet random men from the internet in person. But after adamant pleading from Sally that she didn't feel safe going by herself, I agreed. We took our phones with us for the walk. I had a kitchen knife on me just in case something were to happen, and I needed to defend myself. The route that we had to take to get there didn't have very many street lamps, and there weren't any houses. We were surrounded by trees on both sides. When we got to the parking lot, the only car parked nearby was a black, beat-up 2000 Toyota Corolla. The car was still running when we got there, and from what we could tell, there was more than one person inside. The man from the picture got out of the front passenger seat and left the door wide open behind him before approaching us. I turned my flash on so I could see, and he was obviously on something. I can't tell you what kind of drug it was for the life of me, but his eyes were so wide, they looked like they were about to pop out of his head. He was jittery and kept twitching. I became very conscious of how big he was, maybe 6'2", around 280 pounds. For reference, my friend and I did not look our ages, even without makeup. I'm about 5'2", and my friend was pretty tall, probably around 5'7". We were both significantly smaller than him. The man reached out for us and caught my friend by the arm. I went to get my knife as quickly as I could, and that's when I saw his friends getting out of the car. He invited us back to his car and offered us booze and drugs, but after seeing my knife and that, I was ready to call the police. He let go of my friend. I took Sally's arm and ran faster than I ever had in my entire life. We took the long way home to avoid them finding out where she lived in case they were following us. Once we got there, her family was still sound asleep. We locked all the doors, closed the blinds, and blocked them on everything. There wouldn't be any sleeping that night. We were constantly peeking out the window, and to our dismay, that same Toyota was circling around her apartment building. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. I never mentioned any of this to my parents out of fear of getting grounded or getting in trouble. I'm 16 now and they still have no clue. But I still get nervous when I see a car similar to the one from that night. As for Sally, her parents never found out either, and we agreed to never speak about it again. Thankfully, she moved into a new house just a few weeks after that happened. It's safe to say, Sally and I haven't spoken in about 3 years. She was upset at me for ruining her night, and our friendship didn't last for long after that. We had a pretty bad falling out, but looking back on it, it was definitely for the better. So, to Sally, thank you for teaching me a very valuable lesson and making me realize that some people are best just left alone. And to the man and his friends who tried to prey upon us, let's never meet again. This happened in the early 2000s and I was around 12 at the time. My dad had passed away about 2 years before leaving my mom, sister, and myself. To help me cope with my father's passing, my mom took me to the animal shelter to pick out a dog since having a large dog was something that I always wanted. In one of the cages was a small shepherd husky, huddled in the corner that I right away fell in love with. When this incident happened, he was about 1 year old, 90 pounds, and my best friend. My mom worked nights and my older sister was taking advantage that mom wasn't home and she would constantly leave me alone. I didn't mind though because then she couldn't boss me around since when she was home, she would try to be mom telling me what to do and when to go to bed. We lived in a small middle-class suburb with a low crime rate that I wasn't scared to be home alone. I was sitting in the living room playing video games and I got up to head to the kitchen to grab a drink. In the kitchen, I had a clear view through the back door and I could see the garage open. Thinking that I just left it open after putting my bike away, I headed out the door to close it. My dog was sleeping in the basement since he liked to lay on the cool floor during the summer months and I didn't think to take him out with me. I step out the door and make it about 5 feet from it when I notice in the darkness a crouched shadow moving in the garage. I froze, trying to get my eyes to adjust to make out what the shadow was. It finally hit me when I saw the figure stand up and turn towards me. I was terrified and felt like I had been glued to the spot. I knew that this person could see me since the back porch light was shining above me. At that moment, the figure starts running towards me. I was too scared to move and let out more of a yelp than a scream. But that was all it took for my dog to hear, and the next thing I hear is him behind me, snarling and growling. I could make out it was a man, but no features, when he now froze seeing this 90-pound beast behind me. He turned and ran for the back fence, with my dog right behind me. The guy made it to the fence, and since it was only about 4 feet, he hopped right before my dog got to him. After he got away, my dog came running back to me and we went inside where I barricaded the doors. I don't know why, but I didn't call the cops and never told my mom or sister what had happened. One thing that bothered me was that he had to have known I was inside, since the lights were on and the blinds were open. So why take the risk to hit a house when somebody was clearly home? The next morning, after my mom was home and went outside to finally close the garage door, and noticed that what he had been going through was my dad's toolbox. I locked up the garage and never told anyone about what had happened. I walked my dog to McDonald's and got him a burger and ice cream cone for being my hero. Stranger danger was something my mom was hyper-vigilant about teaching us. She would always warn us about the horse farm down the street, and told us that bad people lived there. Well, it was about a mile away and I usually was only that far from home, if I was on my bike or with a group, so I wasn't very concerned. One day, I was walking in my neighborhood when some neighbors I didn't know well began to talk to me. While we knew most of our immediate neighbors, this couple lived on a street perpendicular to ours, and I only interacted with them at Halloween if that. I was probably 7 or 8. They told me that they were giving away a trampoline, and oh man, I had always wanted a trampoline. I begged my parents for one for years. I was pretty excited to say the least, but I told them that I would have to ask my parents first. They told me that I could have it, that it was in the backyard waiting for me, but not to come back with my parents. I thought that was a little strange and didn't listen to them about not getting my parents, but I still wanted the trampoline. Now, my dad is a totally oblivious person, so apparently when I told him, this didn't raise any red flags and he came along with me to ask about the trampoline. We knocked on the door and waited at their front steps, but no one came to the door. I was bummed out. I really wanted that trampoline. Years later, reflecting on the event, I realized that there was a small fenced area in that yard where they would sometimes ride a horse. I once had even pet the horse and admired the owner as she rode it. I didn't think of it as a farm as aside from the one horse and the fenced-in area. It was a normal yard, so my mother's warnings were in vain. I shudder thinking about what would have happened if I had gone to the house alone. Thankfully, I had a bit of sense, though at the time I didn't realize how close I was to danger. Just how close I was to having a trampoline before those people inexplicably took my dream away. My roommate V was always at her boyfriend's place, so I was living essentially alone in a 2-bedroom apartment, and my friend Esme was crashing with me while looking for her own place. She found a place nearby renting a master bedroom with an attached bathroom, female only, for really cheap. We checked out the Google Street View on my laptop and it looked like a cute little beach house. She rode her bike over to check it out alone. She said that they were 2 beach-type stoner guys, and they would close talk while giving her obvious elevator eyes the whole time. She was a pretty petite Mexican girl and was 21, but looked younger, and the older guy kept saying that she was just what they were looking for, kinda slowly in what she described as an uber creepy voice. The younger of the 2 guys just stared and followed them around. She thought that it was odd that they each slept in the tiny guest rooms and they were renting out the master bedroom, but decided to take a look at it anyway. She said it was a really nice room with a big heavy wooden 4-poster bed in the middle of the room. That looked like it belonged in a castle, and the bathroom had a huge shower with multiple shower heads in the walls, like it was built for a bunch of people. She didn't like being in this back bedroom with the 2 guys looming over her, so she said it was really stuffy and that she wanted to make sure her unlocked bike in the front yard was okay. She all but ran to the front yard, and once she was outside with bystanders, she felt much better. So, she's standing in the front yard with the older guy, and he's explaining that she can move in right away, but the bed has to stay exactly where it is. It comes with the room and it's bolted to the floor, so it can't be moved. They have special sheets for it and everything, so she can bring all her stuff, but can never move that bed. Also, she can have friends over, but only if they're also young women or girls and no men, and they can sleep over, but they also need to sleep in the bed. The hardwood floor was just too uncomfortable. The couches in the living room are suede, so no one can sleep on them. All these reasons why a big pile of girls need to sleep on the bed. So she's sufficiently creeped out by this guy and texts me to come over. I ride my bike over, and as I'm pulling up, she's leaving. We start to ride a little away and he yells after us. It's mandatory, but we always have a blast. She kind of shudders and I asked her what's up. She said that she'll tell me over drinks, so we ride to the nearest little beach bar. She explains about the room, the bed, the guys, and then tells me part of the deal is a mandatory skiing trip to Lake Tahoe in Northern California each year. She can invite girls on the trip that have been to the house before, if the guys think they're cool enough. It's free for her and her girlfriends, but mandatory that she go with the guys as their official woman. There would be other men, but they would all have brought their own girls. He said it like the woman would be assigned to them or something. So, our minds start racing and we convince ourselves that the bedroom and the trip are some elaborate scam. Needless to say, she never moved in there or took them up on their free ski weekend offer. V ended up moving in with her boyfriend, and Esme moved in with me for a couple years. She was an awesome roommate.